Most people think the worst thing a family can do is disown you. They are wrong. Disowning is loud. It involves arguments, slammed doors, and raised voices. It at least acknowledges you existed. The worst thing a family can do is erase you. Erasure is quiet. It is the slow removal of your name, the rewriting of history until your truth becomes a lie. My father erased me without hesitation, trading his daughter for a convenient fiction. But what people like him never understand is this. When you take everything from someone, you also take away their reason to stay silent. I was erased, but I never stopped fighting back. My name is Alyssa Morgan. I am 28 years old. Before everything collapsed, my life looked normal. I worked at my father's company as an assistant manager. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. I had a routine, a small apartment I loved, and most importantly, I had my family close. Working for your father comes with a unique pressure. You are never just an employee or just a daughter. You must be perfect at both. I worked hard. I handled reports, meetings, and daily operations without complaint. I arrived early and stayed late because I wanted to earn my place. I wanted my father to see my competence, not my last name. I trusted him completely. He was strict, but I believed he was fair. I was wrong. Then there was my sister, Natalie. If I was the foundation, she was the stained glass everyone admired. She was charming, confident, and effortlessly captivating. People trusted her instantly. I used to think that was her strength. I never imagined it would become my weakness. Natalie didn't officially work at the company, but she was always around, visiting, talking to employees, quietly observing meetings. Slowly, she began inserting herself into business matters, offering suggestions here and there. At the time, I didn't question it. She was my sister. Why would I? But sometimes I caught her watching me. I would look up from my desk and find her standing in the doorway, smiling in a way that felt calculated, like she already knew something I didn't. I ignored it. I told myself I was overthinking. We are taught to ignore our instincts to keep the peace. I stopped ignoring it the day my father called an emergency meeting. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was reviewing a contract when his secretary called, her voice cold and formal. "Alyssa, your father needs you in the conference room, immediately." I walked down the hallway, unaware I was heading toward my own execution. When I entered, the atmosphere felt wrong. My father sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. He didn't look at me like his daughter. He looked at me like a stranger. And beside him sat Natalie, calm, composed, wearing a soft smile like she already knew how this would end. The door closed behind me. The silence was suffocating. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was cold, formal, unfamiliar. "Alyssa," he said, "we need to talk about something very important." I nodded slowly, my grip tightening on my notebook. "Okay, what happened?" He didn't answer right away. He didn't soften. Instead, he reached out and pushed a thick manila file folder across the polished wood of the table. It stopped right in front of me. "Read this," he said. I opened the file. My heart did not just drop, it plummeted. It felt like the floor of the conference room had vanished. Inside were printed bank records, internal transaction reports, and digital screenshots, pages and pages of them. I scanned the highlighted lines. All of them showed massive, unauthorized amounts of money being transferred from the company's reserve accounts into untraceable offshore holdings. We were talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. And right there, next to every single approval timestamp, next to every single routing number, was my name, authorized by Alyssa Morgan. The blood rushed to my ears, a loud roaring sound. I shook my head immediately, pushing the file back. "This is not me," I said, my voice rising in panic. "I didn't do any of this." Natalie sighed. It was a soft, tragic sound. She looked at me with an expression of profound, manufactured disappointment. "Alyssa," she said gently, her voice dripping with fake empathy. "Why are you lying? These records are very clear." I turned toward her. The air in the conference room felt suddenly very thin. You did this, I said. Natalie did not flinch. Her expression remained a perfect, unbothered portrait of confusion. Excuse me, she whispered, sounding genuinely hurt. You set this up, I said, my voice rising. I tapped the file with my index finger. I don't know how you got these routing numbers or how you manufactured these timestamps, but this is fake. My father raised his hand. A single, sharp motion. Enough. That one word hit harder than the accusation itself. It was the gavel coming down. I froze. I looked at the man who had taught me how to ride a bicycle, the man who had taught me how to read a balance sheet, the man who I had spent my entire adult life trying to impress. He looked at me with an exhaustion that was entirely laced with disappointment. I trusted you, Alyssa, he said. His voice was not loud, it was heavy. I gave you responsibility in my company, and this is what you do. You siphon funds into offshore accounts while smiling at me over Sunday dinner. I didn't do anything, I said, my voice shaking now. The panic was starting to rise, a cold water filling my lungs. Dad, please, look at the IP addresses. Look at the authorization trails, just check it properly. I am an assistant manager. I don't even have the clearance to authorize a transfer of this size without a secondary signature. But he wasn't listening. People who have already decided you are guilty do not listen to your math. They only listen to their own narrative. Natalie leaned closer to him. She placed a gentle, comforting hand on his arm and spoke softly. I couldn't hear everything she said, but the acoustic design of a mahogany conference room is a funny thing. I caught the words she wanted me to catch: risk, company reputation, legal trouble. My father closed the file slowly. He let out a long, ragged breath. When he looked at me again, the disappointment had hardened into concrete. I do not want this investigated further, he said flatly. If we bring in external auditors or the police, the board will panic. The company's stock will take a hit. We will handle this internally. My breath stopped. What? No, Dad, you have to investigate it. That's the only way you'll see I didn't. You will step away from the company immediately, he continued, speaking entirely over me. No, I said quickly, standing up from my chair. This is wrong. You can't just... I said enough. His voice echoed off the glass walls. Silence filled the room. The kind of silence that rings in your ears. Natalie didn't even look at me anymore. She was staring down at the polished wood of the table, and I could see the absolute faintest tremor at the corner of her mouth. She was hiding a smile. That was when I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a discussion. It wasn't an inquiry. It was a decision that had been made long before I walked through that heavy glass door. And I was the only person in the room who hadn't known it was coming. My father stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. You are suspended from all duties, effective immediately. Leave your security badge and your company phone on the desk. I felt my legs go weak, the edges of my vision blurred. But I'm your daughter, I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't even look at me. He just turned away and walked toward the window, putting his back to me. Natalie finally stood up too. She smoothed her cashmere sweater. She walked past me, heading for the door. But she stopped beside me for just a second. She leaned in, her perfume smelling of jasmine and expensive choices. Only I could hear her voice. I told you, she whispered, her tone light and conversational. You should have stayed invisible. Then she walked out. The glass door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, my life inside that family started disappearing in real time. If you are watching this, and you have ever been the person sitting in a room watching a lie become the truth while nobody listens to your facts, hit that like button and subscribe. You are not alone. Tell me in the comments what your family refused to hear. We are building a community of people who refuse to be silenced anymore. After that meeting, everything moved fast. Too fast for me to even process. When you lose a job, you usually get a cardboard box and an awkward goodbye from HR. When you are erased by your own blood, the efficiency is staggering. The next morning, driven by some desperate instinct to prove my innocence, I drove to the office. I walked up to the glass turnstiles in the lobby. I swiped my access card. The light flashed red. I swiped it again. Red. The security guard, a man named Stan, who I had brought a coffee to every Friday morning for 3 years, stepped out from behind his desk. He did not look me in the eye. He looked at my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Ms. Morgan," Stan said quietly. "Your credentials have been deactivated. I've been instructed not to let you up." It felt unreal. It felt like I was standing outside my own body, watching someone else's life fall apart on a security camera. I walked back to my car in the cold November air. I sat in the driver's seat and I called my father. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Then I called Natalie. She picked up on the second ring. The background noise sounded like a coffee shop. "Alyssa," she said calmly, like I was a telemarketer interrupting her morning routine. "I think you should stop calling." My hands tightened around my phone. My knuckles were entirely white. "Natalie, tell me what you did. You know this is fake. You know I didn't touch that money." There was a small pause. Then she laughed softly. Not a loud, theatrical villain laugh. Just a soft, amused chuckle. The kind of laugh you give a child who still believes in the tooth fairy. "You still don't understand, do you?" she said. My throat went dry. "Understand what? That no one is going to choose you over me." She ended the call. No explanation, no emotion, just a click and then dead air. That was the exact moment something inside me changed. I stopped waiting for them to fix it. I stopped being the daughter, hoping for her father's forgiveness for a crime she didn't commit. I went home that night. My small, quiet apartment felt like a different place than it had been 24 hours ago. On my kitchen counter, sitting neatly next to my mail, was a thick, legal-sized envelope. It had been delivered by a courier. I opened it. My hands were shaking. Inside was a stack of legal documents. My father's signature was on the bottom of the first page, executed in blue ink. The document stated that I was officially removed from all company responsibilities. It stated that my access to the family trust and all joint financial accounts was terminated immediately. But that was not the part that made me sit down on the hardwood floor. I turned to the third page. It was a copy of a legal petition filed with the county. The family registry update request. I read the last line again and again. The words swam on the page, but the ink did not change. Removal of dependent family member Alyssa Morgan. I whispered my own name in the empty room. Alyssa Morgan. I said it out loud just to confirm that I still existed, because the truth was incredibly simple and incredibly brutal. In their eyes, I didn't. I sat on the floor that night for a long time. The sun went down, turning my apartment into a shadow box. No calls came, no text messages. No one checked if I was okay. For my father, for my sister, I had already been successfully erased. But what people who erase you never seem to understand is this. Erasing someone doesn't mean they disappear. Sometimes it just means they are finally freed from the obligation of protecting your secrets. Sometimes erasing a quiet person is the biggest mistake you can possibly make, because when you strip away the job, the family title, and the inheritance, you leave that person with absolutely nothing to lose. And a woman with nothing to lose is a very dangerous thing to a family built on lies. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the floor, staring at that legal document until my eyes burned. My name had been reduced to a line that could be removed with a signature. But as the sun started to rise, painting the walls of my apartment in pale, cold light, the grief began to evaporate. And what was left underneath was math. I needed answers, not from my father, not from Natalie. I needed answers from the system they had used against me. Let me tell you about the morning after your family erases you. It does not feel like a movie. You do not wake up with a brilliant, finalized plan for justice. You wake up, you make a cup of coffee, and you realize that the silence in your apartment is the loudest thing you have ever heard. When the people who are supposed to protect you decide to destroy you instead, the world feels completely stripped of gravity. You have to learn how to walk all over again, but there is a strange advantage to being erased. When you no longer exist in their system, you are no longer bound by their rules. It was a Wednesday morning. The sky over the city was a flat, pale gray. I dressed carefully. I didn't wear a suit. I was no longer an assistant manager, but I wore a crisp button-down shirt and a tailored coat. I wanted to look like a woman who expected to be answered. I took the copy of the file my father had pushed across the mahogany table, the one with the supposed offshore transfers, and I drove to the downtown branch of the bank listed on the header. Banks are built to be intimidating. They have high ceilings, marble floors, and quiet spaces that make you feel like you should be whispering. I did not whisper. I asked to see the branch manager. I waited for 20 minutes in a glass-walled office. The manager was a man in his late 40s with a very neat tie and the exhausted eyes of someone who deals with other people's panics all day. I sat across from him, and I slid the copy of the bank document across his desk. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. He looked uncomfortable immediately. "I am sorry, I cannot share internal records without authorization." "I understand," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "But I just need you to confirm one thing." He hesitated. The silence in his office was thick, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. "What is it?" I tapped the paper. I didn't ask him to verify the amounts or the routing numbers or my forged signature. I asked him to verify the structure of the lie itself. His eyes scanned it slowly. I watched his face. I watched the way his brow furrowed, the way his eyes darted back to the top left corner, then to the footer. Then his expression changed. That small change told me everything before he even spoke. "This is not our official format," he said quietly. My heart skipped. It was a physical sensation, a sudden, sharp drop in my chest. I leaned forward. "So it is fake." He lowered his voice, glancing out the glass walls of his office, even though nobody was looking at us. "This document was never issued by our bank." I thanked him. I took the paper back. I walked out of the bank. Outside, the sun felt too bright, like it didn't match what I had just learned. The noise of the city traffic rushed back into my ears, but inside my head, everything was completely, terrifyingly quiet. My sister didn't just accuse me. She constructed it, piece by piece. She hadn't just exaggerated a mistake. She hadn't just misunderstood a transaction. She had sat down at a computer, fabricated a bank header, invented routing numbers, typed my name, and printed a lie designed specifically to end my life in that company. And for the first time since this started, I felt something new inside me. Not fear, not confusion, but clarity. If this was planned, then there was a reason behind it, and I was going to find it. I spent the next few days digging deeper. I didn't tell anyone, not even friends. I couldn't risk it reaching my father or Natalie again. When you are hunting a predator, you do not snap twigs in the forest. You move silently. I started with something simple, company records. When they suspend you, they deactivate your keycard and they shut down your primary email. But IT departments in mid-sized family companies are rarely as thorough as they think they are. I had been the assistant manager. I knew the back doors. I knew the legacy servers that hadn't been updated in 3 years. Late at night, I used my old login access that hadn't been fully closed yet. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in my dark apartment. I knew I didn't have much time. I don't know how it was still active, but it worked for a few minutes at a time. That was enough. I didn't look at the financial ledgers. Natalie was too smart to leave a mess there. I looked at the administrative access logs, the digital footprints of who changed what and when. And what I found changed everything. There were internal changes made in the company system just 2 weeks before the accusation. My access level had been quietly reduced, not removed. Reduced. I stared at the screen, the pale blue light reflecting in my eyes, my heart pounding against my ribs. This wasn't an emotional decision. It was strategy. Natalie hadn't discovered fraud and reacted to it. She had prepared the ground. She had quietly downgraded my administrative permissions 2 weeks before the emergency meeting so that when the time came, I wouldn't have the digital authority to freeze the accounts or lock her out. She had built the cage, walked me inside, and locked the door before I even knew I was in a cage. I printed what I could and left immediately, closing the laptop right as the connection timed out. If you are watching this and you have ever discovered the exact moment someone you loved planned your downfall, hit that like button and subscribe. You know the chill I am talking about. Drop a comment and tell me what you found when you finally looked at the evidence. You belong here with the people who pay attention. The next day, I met someone unexpected, an old accountant from my father's company. He was a man in his late 60s who always wore gray cardigans and kept a jar of peppermints on his desk. He used to be kind to me when I was younger. I called him from a blocked number and asked him to meet me at a quiet diner on the edge of town, far from the corporate office. When he arrived, he looked older than I remembered. He sat across from me in the vinyl booth, ordering a black coffee. I showed him the documents, the fake bank records and the printed access logs showing my reduced permissions. He looked nervous immediately. He kept glancing at the diner door, afraid of who might walk in. "Alyssa, why are you involved in this?" he asked. "I just need the truth," I said. He sighed deeply and leaned closer. The smell of diner coffee and old paper hung between us. Then he said something I will never forget. "Your sister didn't just accuse you, she replaced you." I froze. The diner around me faded into background noise. "What do you mean replaced?" He looked around before continuing. "Before the fraud case, she started slowly taking control of internal approvals. Your father was busy, so she handled small decisions first, then bigger ones." My throat went dry. And me. He hesitated. He looked down at his coffee mug, running a finger along the rim, then finally said it. "You were the only person who had legal authority equal to her if your father stepped down or got influenced." I felt my hands go cold. "That means," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "She needed you gone from the system. Not just fired, erased." Everything suddenly made sense. The fake documents, the accusation, the silence from my father. It wasn't random, it was removal. Systematic removal. My father was getting older, he was getting tired. Natalie didn't just want a job at the company, she wanted the whole board. She wanted absolute control. But as long as I was there, the reliable daughter, the assistant manager who knew every vendor and every spreadsheet, I was a legal roadblock. I had shares. I had authority. I walked out of that office feeling like the ground under me wasn't stable anymore. But something inside me was no longer broken. It was awake. If Natalie wanted me erased, then she didn't just take my job. She declared war on my identity, and I was done running from it. That night, I didn't go home right away. I stayed outside for a long time, sitting in my car with the engine off, just thinking. The streetlights cast long amber shadows across the dashboard. Everything I had learned kept repeating in my mind. She needed you gone from the system. That sentence didn't leave me. It echoed in the dark car. It wasn't just a family conflict anymore. It was control, power, ownership. And I was part of something much bigger than I understood before. For the first time, I stopped thinking like a daughter. I stopped hoping my father would call and apologize. I stopped wishing my sister would suddenly develop a conscience. I started thinking like someone who needed proof, real proof, not guesses, not emotions. The next morning, I made a decision. I contacted a lawyer. Not a family lawyer, a corporate fraud lawyer, because I wasn't fighting for an apology anymore. I was fighting for my life. Let me tell you something about lawyers who specialize in corporate fraud. They are very different from family lawyers. Family lawyers want to know how you feel. They want to know about the history, the arguments, the emotional damage. Corporate fraud lawyers do not care about your broken heart. They care about timestamps. They care about IP addresses. They care about the exact moment a lie was put into writing. The lawyer I hired was a man named Mr. Vance. He had a quiet office on the 14th floor, a desk completely clear of clutter, and the exhausted, sharp eyes of a man who spent his life looking at the ugly things people do to each other for money. I sat across from him and placed my documents on his desk. The fake bank headers, the IT access logs showing my permissions being reduced, the sworn statement I had convinced the old accountant to sign. Mr. Vance did not say a word for 20 minutes. He just read. He turned the pages slowly, occasionally running his pen under a line of text. The silence in his office was thick, broken only by the ticking of a heavy clock on the wall. Finally, he closed the folder. He took off his glasses and looked at me. "If what you are saying is correct, and these logs hold up," he said, his voice entirely flat and professional, "your sister didn't just frame you. She attempted to legally remove your claim to the company." He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. This wasn't a sudden panic to cover up a mistake. This was a calculated legal execution. I nodded slowly. The words felt heavy in the room. "So what do I do?" He looked at me directly. He didn't offer a soft option. "You go public legally. Court route, full exposure, no more private handling. We file an injunction, we subpoena the actual bank records, and we compel the company's internal server data into the public record." For a second, I didn't answer. Court. That word is a terrifying thing when it involves your own blood. Families hate courtrooms because courtrooms do not keep secrets. A courtroom is a place where the private myth of a happy family is dragged into the fluorescent light and dissected by strangers. Once you go there, there is no going back. There are no more Sunday dinners. There are no more polite holidays. You are burning the bridge, and you are salting the earth underneath it. But then I remembered the meeting room. I remembered the coldness in my father's face. I remembered the heavy glass door clicking shut. I remembered Natalie leaning in, smelling of jasmine and whispering, "You should have stayed invisible." And I realized something very simple. I had already been erased once. They had already burned the bridge. I was just standing in the ashes. There was absolutely nothing left to lose. I looked at Mr. Vance. My hands were not shaking. "Then prepare everything," I said. He nodded once. That was the exact moment I stopped being the person they pushed out and started becoming the person who would come back. If you are watching this and you have ever had to take the hardest path because the easy path required you to accept a lie, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment and tell me about the day you decided to stop protecting the people who hurt you. You belong here. We are a community of people who refuse to be quiet anymore. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. I didn't sleep much the night before, not because I was scared, but because the anticipation of finally telling the truth after being suffocated by a lie feels like holding your breath underwater while looking at the surface. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. I did not wear a suit. I did not wear anything that made me look like the assistant manager of a company I no longer worked for. I wore the simplest clothes I owned, a clean, tailored black dress and flat shoes. No company title, no family name protection, no armor, just me, Alyssa Morgan, 28 years old. When I walked into the courtroom, the air felt heavy, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old wood. The wooden benches were hard and unforgiving. Across the room at the opposing counsel's table, I saw them. My father sat stiffly in his chair. He was wearing his best navy suit, but he looked older than he had a month ago. His shoulders were tight. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, actively avoiding looking in my direction. And right beside him was Natalie. She looked completely calm, almost confident. She was wearing a flawless beige blazer, her hair perfectly styled. She was leaning over, whispering something to her lawyer with a small, relaxed smile. She looked like a woman who was attending a minor administrative meeting. She looked like a woman who had already won. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, a woman with silver hair and no patience for wasted time, took her seat. When the judge called the case, Mr. Vance stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a dramatic opening statement. He just opened his heavy leather binder and started placing the truth onto the public record. He presented the fake bank documents. He presented the subpoenaed records from the actual bank, confirming that the routing numbers on Natalie's file did not match the institution's real format. He presented the internal system changes, showing the exact IP address and timestamp where my administrative access had been downgraded 2 weeks before the alleged fraud took place. He submitted the old accountant's sworn statement. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a small shift in Natalie's face. It was just a flicker, a microscopic tightening of her jaw. Her eyes darted toward her lawyer, then back to the judge. But she recovered quickly, smoothing her expression back into that mask of calm superiority. Then it was her turn. Natalie's lawyer called her to speak. She stood up. She looked at the judge, and then, incredibly, she looked directly at me. Her voice was steady, coated in that sickening, manufactured empathy she had perfected over 30 years. "Your Honor," Natalie said softly, "Alyssa is unstable. This entire proceeding is nothing more than a desperate attempt to damage this family and this company out of personal anger. She was caught mismanaging funds, and instead of taking responsibility, she is lashing out. I feel terrible for her, I really do. But these allegations are completely manufactured. She lied with the absolute ease of someone who breathed it, like I was the problem, like I was a tragedy she had to endure. My father didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at his hands, torn between the hard, cold math Mr. Vance had just presented and the golden child he had already chosen to believe. Mr. Vance stood up again. He adjusted his glasses. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "we request to submit one final piece of evidence for this portion of the hearing, a recorded file recovered from the company's internal VoIP server logs, dated 3 days before my client was suspended." Natalie's smile faded slightly. She looked at her lawyer, who looked confused. Mr. Vance pressed play on his laptop. A small speaker on the desk amplified the sound into the dead, silent courtroom. There was a brief crackle of static. And then Natalie's voice filled the room. It was not the soft, empathetic voice she had just used. It was clear. It was calm. It was ice cold. "I don't care what it takes. She needs to be removed completely. If she stays in the system, she will ruin everything. Just bypass the secondary authorization and run it. I'll handle Dad." The silence that hit the room was instantaneous and absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing. My father's head slowly turned toward Natalie. For the first time since this started, he didn't look angry. He didn't look disappointed in me. He looked deeply, fundamentally unsure of his entire reality. Natalie's face completely changed. The beige blazer suddenly looked like a costume. The color drained from her cheeks. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice slipping out in a panicked, breathless rush. That's edited," she whispered. But her voice didn't sound strong anymore. It wasn't the voice of the woman who arrived in rooms. It was louder. It was forced. For the very first time in my entire life, I was watching my perfect, untouchable sister lose control. The judge stared at Natalie for a long, heavy moment. Then she picked up her gavel. "We will take a 15-minute recess to review these logs," the judge said, her voice sharp. The gavel cracked against the wood. I sat back in my chair. The courtroom was buzzing with whispers, but inside my head, everything was completely still. I knew the lie was no longer protected. It was exposed. But the biggest revelation of the day hadn't even happened yet. Let me tell you about what happens during a 15-minute recess in a courtroom. People who watch legal dramas on television think a recess is just a break. It is not a break. It is an incubation chamber. When a lie has just been exposed, those 15 minutes feel like 15 hours. The air in the hallway outside the courtroom becomes impossibly thick. You watch the people who have spent their entire lives underestimating you suddenly realize that they are the ones who miscalculated the math. I sat on a wooden bench outside the double doors. Mr. Vance sat next to me, reviewing his notes, entirely unbothered. Down the hall, my father stood near a drinking fountain. He was not drinking. He was staring at the marble floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked like a man who had just realized the house he had been living in for 30 years was built on a sinkhole. Natalie was nowhere to be seen. She had vanished into a side corridor with her lawyer, no doubt trying to spin a new web out of the audio recording that had just trapped her. But there is no spinning a voice when the voice is your own, and the intent is crystal clear. When the bailiff called us back into the room, the atmosphere had completely changed. The courtroom felt heavier. No one spoke casually anymore. The low hum of whispers was gone. Natalie walked back to the opposing counsel's table. She wasn't smiling now. The flawless mask of the golden child, the perfect, untouched beige blazer, the effortless superiority, it was all hanging by a thread. Her jaw was locked tight. She looked at the judge, refusing to look in my direction. When the session resumed, the judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at the bench. The audio recording had shifted the entire foundation of the hearing, but a recording alone is just intent. It is not the full architecture of the crime. The judge asked for final clarifications. Mr. Vance stood again. He did not look triumphant. He looked like an accountant who had found a glaring error on a ledger and was simply correcting it for the record. "Your Honor," Mr. Vance said, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "this case is not only about fraud. The audio log proves intent, but it does not fully explain the motive. This is about intentional identity removal and financial manipulation within a family-owned company." He opened his heavy leather binder. He reached inside and pulled out a single thick yellowed document. It did not look like a freshly printed bank log. It looked old. It looked foundational. He walked forward and placed this final document on the judge's table. "I submit into evidence my client's inheritance record," Mr. Vance said. "The original company ownership file, drafted when the LLC was first incorporated." I watched Natalie's face. For the first time all day, her eyes widened in genuine, unadulterated horror. She had planned for the bank records. She had probably even considered the IT logs. But this was the one thing Natalie never expected to exist in complete form. She thought she had buried it. The judge picked up the document. She read it slowly, turning the pages with deliberate care. The silence in the room stretched out, taut and fragile, like a piano wire pulled to its absolute limit. Then the judge looked up. She didn't look at my father. She didn't look at Natalie. She looked directly at me. "Miss Morgan," the judge said, her voice softer than it had been all morning, "did you know you had legal shareholder rights in this company?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Shareholder rights. I had spent my entire adult life working as an assistant manager. I had arrived at 7 a.m. in the freezing cold. I had filed the reports, managed the vendors, and accepted the meager salary of a mid-level employee. I had bowed my head and thanked my father for the opportunity to simply be in the building. I had thought I was just an employee, hoping to earn my father's love. I shook my head slowly. The realization was a heavy, suffocating weight in my chest. "No," I whispered, the microphone catching the tremor in my voice. "I was never told. If you are listening to this right now and you have ever discovered that the people who raised you kept you in the dark about your own worth just to keep you controllable, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment and tell me what they hid from you. You are not alone. There is an entire community of us who eventually found the paperwork." The judge stared at me for a long moment, reading the absolute truth on my face. Then her expression hardened. She turned her gaze toward the opposing table. She turned toward my father. "Mr. Morgan," the judge said, her voice sharp and uncompromising, "you signed legal documents removing her access. You signed the family registry update. Did you verify the ownership structure before doing so?" My father did not answer immediately. He sat frozen in his chair. The man who ran a successful corporate enterprise, the man who demanded perfection and immediate answers from everyone who worked for him, was completely paralyzed. His hands, resting on the polished wood of the table, were shaking slightly now. I had never seen my father's hands shake. He started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat and tried again, looking down at his trembling hands. "I trusted my other daughter," he said quietly. I trusted my other daughter. That sentence felt like a crack in the entire room. It wasn't an excuse, it was a confession of absolute failure. He had traded the daughter who actually held the foundation of his company together for the daughter who simply looked good standing in front of it. He had signed away my identity, my livelihood, and my legal rights without even checking the math, entirely because Natalie had smiled and told him to. That was the moment Natalie finally snapped. The pressure of the silence, the weight of the undeniable proof, the sight of her father breaking down, it was too much for the golden child to bear. She suddenly spoke up, pushing her chair back aggressively. "She is twisting everything," Natalie shouted, her voice echoing violently in the quiet courtroom. "I did nothing illegal. She was the one who mismanaged the accounts. She's just jealous. She's always been jealous." But her voice wasn't stable anymore. It wasn't the smooth, charming tone she used to manipulate vendors and board members. It was louder. It was forced. It was the frantic, high-pitched panic of a woman watching her entire fabricated reality burn to the ground. The judge did not tolerate it. She raised her hand, palm flat. "Enough," the judge commanded. The word hit the room like a physical strike. Natalie's mouth closed. She sank back into her chair, her chest heaving, her perfectly styled hair suddenly looking rigid and unnatural. Then, my lawyer played the final piece. He didn't argue with Natalie. He didn't raise his voice to match hers. Corporate fraud lawyers do not engage in shouting matches. They engage in timelines. Mr. Vance projected a timeline report onto the screen at the front of the courtroom. It showed everything clearly. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting and IT tracking. Point 1. The exact dates and timestamps showing the changes in my access rights before the accusation ever happened. Point 2. The digital footprint proving the creation of the fake bank documents on Natalie's personal company laptop. Point 3. The internal manipulation of company approvals, demonstrating how Natalie had systematically bypassed secondary authorizations to siphon funds. Point 4. The routing numbers tracing the massive financial movements tied directly back to offshore accounts registered under Natalie's name. There was no emotion in the room anymore. There were no tears. There was no family drama. There were just facts, hard, indisputable mathematical facts. My sister had not just tried to get me fired, because I unknowingly held equal shareholder rights, rights that would have allowed me to challenge her control of the company when my father eventually stepped down. She had executed a meticulous, premeditated plan to legally and financially erase me from the family line. I looked at the screen. I looked at the timeline of my own destruction, and then I looked at my father. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a horrific, crushing realization. He had handed the keys of his empire to a thief, and he had thrown the only honest person in his life out into the cold. The judge gathered the papers on her desk. She tapped them once against the wood. The sound signaled the end of the line. The truth was out, and there was absolutely nowhere left for the lie to hide. Let me tell you how a golden child breaks. It is not a graceful thing. When a person has spent their entire life standing on a pedestal built by other people's hands, they do not know how to land when the pedestal is finally kicked away. The judge did not offer sympathy. She offered rulings, the fake documents, the wire fraud, the intentional manipulation of shareholder rights. It was all forwarded to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal review. Natalie's assets were frozen. Her access to the company was terminated by a court injunction before we even stood up from our chairs. As the bailiff approached the opposing table to escort her out of the courtroom for formal processing, Natalie turned and looked at me. The beige blazer was wrinkled. Her perfect hair was undone. She looked small, terrified, and entirely ordinary. She expected me to gloat. She expected me to smile the way she had smiled at me in that mahogany conference room months ago. I did not smile. I did not feel victorious. "I didn't win," I said softly. my voice carrying across the space between us. I just stopped disappearing. She was taken out of the courtroom, and just like that, the flawless, untouchable version of my life she had built her entire identity around started collapsing. The heavy wooden doors closed behind her, and the silence that followed was the cleanest sound I had heard in 28 years. After the case ended, the adrenaline slowly left my blood. I packed my documents back into my simple black tote bag. I thanked Mr. Vance. I walked out of the courtroom, down the marble hallway, and pushed open the heavy brass doors leading outside. The air outside the courthouse was crisp and sharp. It tasted like cold pavement and early winter. The sky was a pale, unbothered blue. My father tried to speak to me again. He was standing near the bottom of the concrete steps. He looked diminished. The powerful CEO, the strict man who measured affection in performance reviews, was gone. In his place was just an aging father who had finally realized the exact cost of the lie he had chosen to believe. We stood outside the courthouse. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The traffic moved on the street behind him, the city carrying on as if an entire family had not just been permanently dismantled. Then he finally spoke. "I failed you," he said. His voice was low, heavy. It was the sound of a man who had reached the end of a ledger and found that he was the one entirely in debt. I looked at him, but I didn't feel like the same daughter I used to be. I didn't feel like the assistant manager who arrived at 7 a.m. just to earn a nod of approval. I didn't feel like the girl who swallowed her intuition just to keep his peace. I didn't need perfection, I said, keeping my voice steady. I just needed to be heard. He lowered his head. He looked at the concrete steps beneath his expensive leather shoes. "I know," he whispered. Silence followed. I could see regret in his eyes. I could see the desperate, silent plea that we could somehow go back to the mahogany table, back to the Sunday dinners, back to the way things were before the lie tore us apart. But regret doesn't rebuild what was broken. Apologies are just the sound a door makes when it finally unsticks. They do not magically fix the house that burned down behind it. I took a step back. "I'm not coming back to the company," I said. He looked up quickly, panic flashing across his face. "Alyssa." "I'm not angry anymore," I continued, cutting off his plea before it could form. "But I'm also not the person who lived there." I saw the exact moment he understood. He understood that he had not just lost his golden child to a criminal investigation, he had lost the reliable one to the truth. Then I turned away. I walked forward alone. I walked down the street, my flat shoes clicking rhythmically against the sidewalk. I didn't look over my shoulder. Some silences need to be heard, and some distances need to be kept. I was not erased. I was not forgotten. I was not invisible anymore. If you are listening to this, and you have ever been the person your family tried to quietly write out of the script, I need you to remember this. When toxic people erase you, they think they are punishing you. They think they are taking away your only source of light. They do not realize that they are actually handing you the match. You do not owe the world an apology for surviving the people who were supposed to protect you. Dignity is not a shouting match. Dignity is a filing cabinet. It is the quiet, methodical gathering of facts. It is the courage to sit in the dark until you have enough proof to turn on all the lights at once. Because the truth is simple, they tried to remove me from their world, but in the process, they only taught me how to exist without them. And this time, I would never disappear again. If this story met you where you are, if it reminded you of a truth you have been holding quietly in your own life, drop a comment below. Tell me what your family called you, and tell me how you finally proved them wrong. I will read every single one of them. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and join this community of people who refuse to stay in the background anymore. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. You gave me your time, and that is not nothing. I'll put the kettle on for tomorrow.